Welcome to the Phoenix Prosperity Podcast, where wealth meets legacy. Join your host, Tim Fergestad, as we explore the journeys of Phoenix's finest to success and beyond.
Hello, this is Tim Fergestad. Thank you for joining us. I'm very pleased to have Rick DeGraw with me here today. Rick was the Chief Administrative Officer and Executive Vice President of CopperPoint Mutual Insurance Company. He's worn a lot of hats, sat on boards, and helped out with all sorts of projects. Thank you for coming today, and welcome to the show, Rick.
Thank you, Tim. Glad to be here.
All right, so you're retired, which is awesome.
I am.
I've had a handful of retirees on the show, and they get to do all sorts of great stuff now. Do you have any particular passion projects, or how do you like to spend your time now?
Well, I actually spend a lot of time still working with some nonprofits. My wife and I are active with the Herd Museum.
Nice.
We're active with the Grand Canyon Institute. We have, and just as an aside, I run the irrigation district for my old neighborhood. That means the flood irrigation comes in, and every 2 weeks, everybody gets their yards flooded, and everybody has a problem somewhere along the line. So I deal with that on a regular basis. It's an all volunteer group.
Okay, that's very cool. Can we talk about that for a minute? Just because that's kind of how that was. Correct me if I'm wrong. That was the sort of the origin of the block walls around all the properties back in the day in Phoenix. Is that right?
Yes, they are. You basically have a system that runs on gravity, and your area is broken down by where you are in relation to the canals. And you have to figure out how to take the water off of the bigger canals into the smaller canals, and then into the even smaller canals to get to the individual houses. And it's weird because people don't realize 7th Avenue, for instance, is 7 feet higher than Central Avenue, but the water comes down Central Avenue. So you have to run water uphill for almost a half a mile over to 7th Avenue. And it takes a trained person, somebody that really does know the system. I don't do it. I just run the association.
Okay.
But the guys, the Zanjeros that have been doing this for many years, are amazing how they can control that water.
Okay, interesting. So context for our listeners and watcher or viewers, if in case they don't know, instead of having irrigation lines running from your water throughout your yard, they would literally dump water onto the property and flood it and let it absorb into the ground, right?
That is correct. And if you look at the neighborhoods that have really big trees, old established trees, most of them have irrigation because trees love a lot of water, and irrigation keeps trees healthy. That's why every one of the historic districts in Phoenix is an irrigation district. We have 77 homes in our irrigation district, and we deliver water 17 times a year. And it will run in my yard probably for 45 minutes to 50 minutes, and they just flood the entire yard. You have ways to get it to the backyard and side yard and things like that. But that's the only reason you can have really big trees, is to have irrigation.
Okay. And how much of the valley converted versus how many still use that?
I don't know that I can answer that. SRP has better figures, but I'd say there's less than, our system was put in 1923. And I'd say about half of all the irrigation people who take irrigation have gone to using city water and using sprinklers. Right. But it's much cheaper if you don't use city water, and you get a lot more water if you have irrigation, which is why the trees all do so well.
Right. Okay. So you could probably tell where the irrigation districts are just by driving around looking for the big trees.
Exactly correct. Yep.
Okay. I'm thinking of in my mind now where I think they are as I drive.
If you go down to Encanto, That's all irrigation. So,
Right.
and if you go up north central, all that's irrigation, all the way up to almost to northern. And there are several different canals that cross Central Avenue on the way down.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. That's very interesting. Very, very cool. So, in addition to that, I mean, you used to sit on a lot of boards, and is there any in particular that you are think of fondly that you had maybe a bigger impact, or something that meant something special to you?
Most of them I think of fondly, but I would say Children's Action Alliance is probably the one most people know about. It's been around for more than 40 years. I was lucky enough to have Eddie Basha as a close friend, and Eddie and I were the first two so-called founders of Children's Action Alliance, and I was president of the Children's Action Alliance board for a number of years. That's had a lot of impact on how kids are treated in Arizona, how they're cared for, what programs are available to them, how they can, how the legislature treats them in both education and in family care and things like that. That's
Right.
probably the biggest one. Another one that I chaired was Go Red for Women. That's very big in assisting women in cancer issues and putting together groups for people to get through difficult problems in their lives, things like that.
Sure.
But I've been on a bunch of different boards. I enjoyed it. It was always nonprofits. While they don't pay people, they don't pay board members like me.
Sure. Sure.
We're all volunteer, but
Right.
their staff has to be there because it's a project of love because they're not certainly not being paid like they would be in private industry.
Right.
But without nonprofits, most of the things that people think as good in the valley wouldn't exist.
Right. Right. That's incredibly powerful statement. That's one of the things that as I've gotten older, I think when you're younger, maybe you're just inherently more selfish because you grow up and everybody does things for you as a kid, right? And as you get older, you
Right.
start realizing, and you have kids of your own, you start doing, you give up a lot of your time and stuff for other things, and you start realizing that's how the world works.
Yeah, and if you're foolish enough, you volunteer to be a coach on a little league team or
Five seasons.
oh, it's just I did that too often, where parents took things so seriously that
Oh
they,
yeah.
this was professional baseball or professional football for them.
Right.
So the kids just wanted to have fun.
Right. Right. Yeah. A lot of kids' activities now are pretty intense.
Yep.
Even my kids are both in the marching band at the high school,
Uh-huh.
and uh, during the season, it's a long season, like a lot of things now. As soon as the season stops, like the off season starts. But
Right.
like during school year, it's like sometimes it's 30 hours a week
Yeah,
just to be in the band.
exactly correct. And quite honestly, what the bands do now is just amazing. You look at some of these high school bands, the marching bands, the hours and hours they have to put in figuring out
Right.
how you march. Hell, I couldn't march down a football field and figure out where to turn here and where to turn left and when to spin around properly. It's
Right.
very difficult.
It is. It is. It's fun to. So that's one of the things I enjoy. Being able to help. My wife and I both volunteer for that a lot. But it's nice because we can participate in the event, but not be like too close to the
Right,
kids. We're at a
right.
distance, and we still get to participate, which is
So
great.
what do your kids play?
My boy was a tenor drummer in the battery, and my wife or my sorry, my wife does apparel and stuff. My daughter is a clarinet.
Oh,
I
great.
drive trucks around to the events with all
Yeah.
the props and the logistics and stuff.
I always thought the guys with the tubas had to go through physical training to be able
Right.
to walk that far carrying something like that.
Yep. Yep. Actually,
So,
my son in the with the quads or whatever, they're 50 pounds.
oh
So
yeah,
that's not
yeah,
trivial either, hopping around
right.
with that. But they do the band they're pretty dialed in. They're a pretty good machine. They're the biggest, best band in the state 3 years in a row at
Wow,
Mountain Ridge High School. Yeah.
wow. That's a lot of work. A lot
Yeah.
of early mornings.
Yeah, and a lot of long days.
Yeah,
These events are all day somewhere else, so they gotta, yeah. yeah, a couple hours on the bus or whatever to get
Yeah.
there, and all day affairs. Okay. But it's again incredibly rewarding. So it's
Well, I was a scout leader for, I don't know, 11 or 12 years, Pack
nice.
329 in Central Phoenix, and we were a
Excellent.
backpacking troop. And you'd go on a backpacking trip with 65 young teenage boys. Oh, just it's amazing. You after a day or two, you'd want to go home because it was just too much.
Right. That's funny. Yeah, I was able to help out with some of that too. My son just 2 weeks ago passed his Eagle Border Review.
Oh,
So
good for him.
yeah,
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 one of my sons was an Eagle Scout.
yeah. Very cool. Very cool. So I have some different sort of reflection questions.
Sure,
One of them was well, actually, before I get into that, let's also share with our viewers that you helped run political campaigns for decades.
I did. I had my own company called Roots Development. And at one time, we were the largest firm for Democrats. We ran some Republican campaigns, but we ran mostly Democratic campaigns. So, I mean, people like Babbitt and Mo Udall and Paul Johnson, that those are names people would recognize. But there's
Right.
all kinds of campaigns, everything from school board campaigns up to the Mondale presidential campaign.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. Um, so what are some of the biggest challenges you've had to overcome in that space or your other
The
careers?
biggest challenge is getting people to believe that they can really make a difference. Um, people, the response is very often, "Oh, what's one vote matter?" Well,
Sure.
one vote matters. There are numerous instances in Arizona, especially, of people winning by 8 votes or 12 votes or some, small numbers. Even in these past presidential elections, the numbers have been relatively small. Um, but still, getting people to be concerned enough about government and not getting them and not having them get turned off by all the stupid things that political people do. Um, People do stupid things all the time.
Sure.
Politicians aren't any different. They're,
Right.
for the most part, not any smarter. They just have a different bent on what they think they should be doing. A good leader is paying attention to what people are saying. A
Right.
bad leader thinks that he knows everything and can make all the decisions without having to worry about anybody else because he's always right, or he or she
Right.
is always right. That's the worst kind of person to elect. The best kind of person to elect is somebody who says, I want to know what you think. I want to know
Right.
what you care about because I'm representing
Yeah.
you.
It's a
I'm not,
republic. Yeah.
you don't work for me, I work for you.
Right. Right. Amen.
So yeah,
What's the
we were a large firm in Central Phoenix, and one year we ran 6 Phoenix City Council races and 22 legislative races. At the same
wow.
time, we were doing 2 statewide races. So we had a bunch of people, and when I retired, I decided I was going to fully retire. So now, when people call me, they ask for my advice, but they really want is money. So you get used to it.
Okay, so back to your challenge that you mentioned there. How did you or how do you um, inspire or motivate people that their vote matters?
Well, first of all, you have to show them that politicians are interested in what they have to say and that other people, their neighbors, their friends, people they work with, they go play tennis with, whatever it happens to be, that they care what you think about somebody as well. And once they understand that a legislator that gets 30,000 votes, every one of those votes is a single individual who somebody has talked to, or they've read something about the candidate, and something the candidate said meant something to the person listening, whether you care about kids or education or the environment or paved roads or good freeways or new airports. everything winds up being political. And so somewhere along the line, some politician is involved. And if you want life to be better, you need to at least pay attention to who is making those decisions. And the best way to do that, if you don't have, if you're not Elon Musk and can't buy people with millions of dollars, as a voter, you can contribute small amounts of money, but you can also contribute your vote and your willingness to talk to others about who the candidate is, what the candidate cares about, what the issue is.
For sure, for sure. You mentioned buying votes. I had somebody on the podcast who received a $1 million check after being part of that here in the Valley.
Well, it used to be that you could not pay people to vote. And when Rose Mofford was governor, and prior to that, Secretary of State for 50 years, that was enforced. Sadly enough, it's not being enforced anymore. The fact that Elon Musk can tell voters he can treat an election as if it's a gambling pod. And it shouldn't be that way. If you're going to vote, you should vote. But you shouldn't vote just to get paid off or just to buy a ticket to the possibility of winning money.
Right.
To me, that goes against everything America stands for.
For sure, for sure. I think in this case, I don't know if it's, I mean, the way around it for that one was it wasn't for voting, it was just for participating in some other side thing in terms of awareness for the vote.
Yes, but the purpose was to drive people to the polls, to get them to say, hey, I'd love to get that $1 million. So if I go vote, I can be part of this process over here, and that might win me $1 million. Shouldn't be that way. Our kids' futures shouldn't be for sale.
They've been buying elections in different ways for a long time, and it's unfortunate.
Yes, it is. And I mean, I know you don't want to get directly political on some of these things, but the fact that depending on what a politician does, he or she can make a lot of money by being a politician. It shouldn't be that way.
No.
I think the legislature is underpaid. You know, if you're talking about $25,000 or $30,000, that's not something you can do on a full-time basis. But the Arizona legislature was not established to be a full-time basis. They were established to be in session for a couple of months, and that's it, a citizen legislature.
Right.
Sadly enough, it's become more than that, and it's basically a full-time job anymore. Right. When you have people in Congress who have to get on a red eye on Thursday night, fly overnight to get home, and then spend Friday, Saturday, and Sunday going to fundraisers or calling people for money, or sitting down with people for larger checks, and then fly back to Washington on Sunday night and live in an apartment with 2 or 3 other people to be a congressperson, that's just ridiculous.
Right. You can't run. The original idea, I believe, from the founding fathers was it was your duty, right? You would be successful in your own right. You would go serve a term, then go back to your position. That's
correct. That is correct.
Right. You can't keep any business or job while also meeting all those criteria you just mentioned.
Right. But it's not that way anymore. People take it as a full-time job, and it seems like when someone gets in office, they never want to leave.
Right. And they somehow leave office 15 years later. Like they get what, $150,000 a year salary, but they leave 15 years later with a net worth of $50 million.
Right. However, just as an example, if someone wanted to create a coin, a mem coin, and sell it to people throughout the United States, and they'd get money for every coin that was bought, even though the coin has no other value.
Right.
That's the same thing as paying somebody off. I don't care what you tell me. It's no different. That person walks away with $100 million or more. because people all over the United States wound up buying, in this case, his coins. That shouldn't be allowed. They shouldn't be allowed to do it. They shouldn't be allowed to know what's going to happen to the market and either buy or sell in order to make a
profit
lot of
from it.
money for themselves.
Right.
Our founding fathers never believed that you should get rich. In fact, most of them did not get rich in the early years. They would go to Congress, serve a period of time, and go home.
Right. Right. So speaking of coins, and so we'll transition a little bit to investments, if you don't mind.
Yes,
All right. So I'm not I have friends who are heavy into cryptocurrency and stuff. I don't do much of that. I don't like things that don't cash flow or have it's just speculation. You're trying to hope to sell it for more than you bought it for, and that's not usually
exactly.
a good plan in my opinion. But can you maybe share some of your best or worst investments?
Well, I think my best investments over the years have clearly been in significant companies that have been around for a long time, that don't grow by 20 and 25% a year, but have a steady growth in the 6 to 12% annual range and stay in those stocks for a long period of time. I've never been a huge fan of bonds, but I understand why you switch to bonds for safety. And I'm certainly not a big fan of crypto. I also understand people buying gold. But again, gold is only worthwhile if people want to buy it.
Right.
And so again, it's this sort of fake base. But when you think about it, all of our money is a fake base.
Right.
What's a dollar bill worth? Well, it might not be the same thing as it was 10 years ago,
Right.
but it stays around the same value. But again, the value of it is determined by other people, by how much they're willing to pay for a dollar. And my worry now is that as the value of the United States around the world is slowly deteriorates, that the value of the dollar against other currency is going to be weakened.
Right.
And when that happens, everybody is going to wind up losing money because the value of the dollar against other currency will not stay as strong.
Right. Right. There's some interesting um, tactics at work right
Yeah.
now that are all looking scary for a lot of people.
Yep.
Okay. So I focus on mostly on real estate nowadays. Did you ever, other than like your home or something, did you ever do real estate investing?
No, no, I have a lot of friends who have bought real estate over the years, and they were very smart at it. But I can remember when they were trying to raise their kids and also go fix the hot water heater at the apartments they rented out to people,
Yeah.
um, or
Clogged toilets.
or clogged toilets, or people that moved out during the night owing
Oh,
2 months or 3 months rent
yeah.
and left the place a disaster. So I've been lucky enough to not have to do that. Not that I didn't work a lot, but the
Right.
fact of the matter was I could spend the time with my family that I decided I was
Sure.
going to spend with my family. So,
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. A lot of truth there. We sold our last single family rental over the holidays, and that's one of the reasons why I transitioned years ago into apartment communities and stuff where I don't have to manage them myself, right? I
right.
started doing more passive investments in these sorts of
Yep.
deals. A lot easier. Reflection question as we wrap things up here. What do you wish you would have known sooner about wealth or success earlier in your career?
If I had known more about the ins and outs of investing, I think I would have taken more interest in it and maybe gone in some other directions or at least been willing to try other things. But I came from a family, when my parents died, I was sorry, but I didn't get a large fortune. I didn't get much money because they lived paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
And I don't think investing was something that I'd ever heard them speak about in my entire life, ever.
That's also like more of a pension generation too, where they didn't necessarily have their own nest
That's
egg.
exactly right. And today, when I look around, I realize how few people are actually going to have a pension.
Right.
They talk about a 401k. Okay, that's wonderful. But to have whether it's a state pension or a city pension or an auto pension or railroad pension, that was at least a promised form of forever money
Right.
that you could actually live on. Today, you can't live on Social Security. If you are, you're not living well and you're worried about it week to week.
For sure.
So I think that's one of the biggest concerns among people my age, whether or not they're going to really mess up the Social Security system, and what that will mean to people who are just hanging on.
For sure. For sure. A lot of my colleagues assume that we're not going to get it.
Right, right. My kids, they understand it, but they don't believe it'll still be there when they reach the age.
Yeah, that's
So I'll tell you a little story. When I was
sure.
at Copper Point, we Copper Point was created in 1923 to provide workers' compensation insurance for the big companies in Arizona. And we switched from being a state agency to being a private entity. We had to go through the legislature to do that. I was hired to plan that campaign out so the legislature would allow us to become private. They did so in 2011. And then my job after that was to actually take them private. And one of the things we had to do was get off the state retirement system and create our own system. What we created was a 401k system. And we matched people's salaries, parts of people's salaries on a weekly basis to put into their 401k, etc. And we hired a company at that time, I think it was BlackRock. And we said to them that they needed to meet with every single one of our 685 employees individually and explain to them what their income was, what it would look like with a 401k over a certain number of years, how much they would have at retirement, explain all that and how it worked. And when we went private, I remember my first big meeting with BlackRock after that. And they asked me, how many people were participating in the salary match. We had 93% participating. Most companies are lucky if they have 50%, and
Right.
many of them are much lower than that. The reason we had 90 some percent was because we took everybody aside individually.
Right.
We didn't have a big meeting and say, well, here's an example if this happens, etc. We said, okay, Joe Schmo, here's what you're making now. Assuming a certain rise in income over the years, here's what you'll be making. Here's how much you'll be getting. If you put this away, here's what it will look like when you want to retire. People want to know that stuff. And if they know it, they're willing to get them into the match. They're willing to participate actively in the 401k. If not, they just whatever money goes in there, and they don't really plan for their future. So, I mean, if a company really takes the time to treat their employees as individuals and explain to them what it will look like 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50 years from now, you'll get a lot better participation in your company's programs.
Right. Right. And kind of like we were talking about earlier in the conversation about the impact of one, right? Of having one-on-one conversations and trying
Right.
to show how important that is feeling like you're heard and understood and having that relationship.
Yep.
A lot better buy-in for sure. All right. Well, Rick, if anyone would like to connect with you or learn more about you, what should they do?
They can text me. Well, they can email me if they want at rdegraw3@gmail.com.
Okay.
Pretty simple.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching and listening. Thank you very much, Rick DeGraw, for joining me today. We appreciate you sharing your story and insights into
Thank
the
you,
impact
Tim.
here in Phoenix.
I'll look forward to seeing your stuff later.
All right. Excellent. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Inspired by our guests? Visit PhoenixProsperityPodcast.com/guest and join us on the show and share your success story with Tim. The spotlight awaits.